Simcha, Simcha, the celebration of life.
Welcome to Simcha, a celebration of life. I'm your host, Jared Epstein. In today's show, we discuss the Jewish month of Elul. We visit the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, and we find the balance in meditation. Elul is the 12th and final month in the Jewish calendar. It is a month that connects the past year with the coming year, and a time when we reflect on where we stand and where we should be going. Rabbi Yossi Goldman explains further.
The Hebrew month of Elul is famous as a month of preparation because it's the month just before Rosh Hashanah, the new calendar year, the Day of Judgment. Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, which follows 10 days later. And these are days of judgment. Who will live? Who will die? All these things are being decided on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So if you're going into a court case where your very life hangs in the balance, surely you need to prepare your case. So the month of Elul is devoted to preparation, to getting our spiritual, personal house in order before the Day of Judgment. And we do it with an emphasis on the three things that we speak about on Rosh Hashanah Day: tshuva, repentance; tefillah, prayer; tzedakah, charity. We increase in all of these things. We say extra psalm, Psalm 27 in particular, morning and evening. We sound the shofar every morning to give us that shivering, trembling, awesome sound that the shofar is able to do when it pierces the silence, and to remember that we have to get our act together, our house in order. It intensifies closer to Rosh Hashanah. The week before Rosh Hashanah, we get up very early in the morning for slichot prayers to do with repentance in particular, to ask God for forgiveness. And all of this goes back to the very, very beginning of history, to the time of Moses. The Jews had sinned, the worst national sin in history, the sin of the golden calf. Moses goes up the mountain to talk to God and to plead with God for forgiveness for his errant nation. Once again, he's up on the mountain talking to God 40 days and 40 nights. He came down on the day that would be Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, which means he went up 40 days earlier, which was Rosh Chodesh Elul. So he went up on the beginning, the first day of Elul, and was there for 40 days, the whole month of Elul, plus the 10 days, Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur. These are 40 days of divine grace, divine forgiveness, of God making himself more accessible, approachable, and inclined to be forgiving if we ask with sincerity and genuineness. So just before the 10 days of awe, Yamim Noraim, the high holy days, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, we have the month of Elul, days of divine grace and accessibility. The King of Kings makes himself open and receptive to his people. The great Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi once gave an analogy. He said it's like the king in the field. In the olden days when there were kings, today do we have any kings these days? I know we have a queen or two, but in the olden days, kings were a lot more powerful than they are today. The king would be in his palace. To get an appointment to see the king is no easy matter. The average person will probably never get an appointment. And if you do, it takes a long time. And when you get there, you have to be on your best behavior and stand at attention. But there are also times when the king goes out to meet and greet his subjects. He'll go on a road show, a tour of the countryside. And so imagine you're a farm worker in the field in your dirty overalls. And there suddenly, trumpets, bugles, the royal carriage is coming by. The king is on his travels through the countryside. and the royal carriage will stop. And the king will reach out, and he will receive everybody with a smiling face. Even the person in his dirty overalls can go, and suddenly there's the king, without any appointments, without any preparation. Suddenly he's there. So the month of Elul is a time when, like the king in the field, the King of Kings also reaches out to his people, makes himself accessible, approachable. All that is required is that we reach out to him with sincerity and genuineness, in prayer, in charity, and in penance. And please God, we will be well prepared for the days of judgment, to be granted a beautiful, wonderful, happy, healthy, sweet new year for all of us and for the whole world.
The Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center was founded in 2008. In partnership with the city of Johannesburg, the center moved into its iconic new building of memory, education, and lessons of humanity in mid-2016. Raising awareness of the Holocaust and the evils of genocide, the center aims to help address the issues of racism, anti-Semitism, bigotry, and marginalization.
So the plan for this morning is we are going to do a program around the Holocaust. Okay, to start off with, you all have a little pamphlet in front of you. What I'd like you to do is I would like you to start filling in this page over here. My identity, please.
The Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center that is in development for the past 8 or 9 years is really a center of education, memory, and where lessons for humanity are going to be learned. It's not a museum. It is a center of dialogue. It's a center where people come to learn, to question, to look at historical examples from the 20th century, genocide from the Herero and Nama in Namibia until Rwanda 1994, and of course in the middle, Armenia, the Armenian genocide in the Holocaust. And then we focus mainly on the 2 case studies in more detail, and that is the Holocaust and the Rwandan genocide of 1994. But from there, we go wider into issues of racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, homophobia, and generally stereotyping, prejudice, othering. And we look at ourselves as society in South Africa and wider at issues of Africa and human rights and learning from the past.
What happens when we start looking at people that don't quite fit into our identity? So firstly, let me just ask you one question. Does this over here define you? Does this define who you are? No. Okay, it's aspects of your identity. We all have unique aspects to ourselves. But what happens when we start looking at a group that don't belong to our little group here, and we start othering them, and we start looking at them as if they're a little bit different to us? We start talking about us and them. All of us behave in a certain way. They don't behave like this. We do this, they are different. Have you heard people talking like that? So we feel it's important that students examine their own identity, that they find out who they are, even if it's just in very general terms. But then the reason for doing that is we want to start introducing the concept of othering, where people start looking at different groups as not belonging or being less than, and looking at how people stereotype today, how prejudices emerge, and then realizing that this is in fact how the Holocaust started. It was an initial targeting of certain groups that went unchecked and then managed to lead to the atrocities that it did. So we try and relate the story just to everyday lives today, to say, when are you othering? When are you looking at people as being different, and why are you doing that?
It is essential that we look at ourselves, if we are young, if we are older, wherever we are in our time, look at ourselves, but also look at commonalities with others. And I think what we try to do through all our programs is to link between history, learning from history, and living life in a more inclusive way and less discriminatory way to the other. That will be throughout our programs.
Everything about this building is based on some kind of symbolism. Louis Levine met with some Holocaust survivors and he asked them if they were to pick one particular symbol that for them represented the Holocaust and the experience, what would they choose? And the most common one that people chose were the railway lines. Can anybody tell me why?
Is it maybe because of the trains that took the Jews to the Holocaust, to the death camps, and that's a symbol that literally the Jews were going to their death?
Our programs of education concentrate on choices. Throughout whatever we do, we want to empower the visitor to realize that people, communities, states, internationally, always have choices. You can choose to be a bystander, you can choose to be a perpetrator, you can choose to be an activist, an upstander, a resistor. It is really very much up to you. I think we know it somewhere that we have the choices, but we are not learning it actively. And if there is one lesson that we would like anyone that comes through our institute to reflect on, is that reflection about choices. And what we hope to do is to get people to become activists. And that's what we're trying to do. And we do it in different ways.
Why do you think the architect placed rectangular slabs on the floor?
I think it could represent like the graves that the Jews were buried in.
They weren't given a burial, and the same with the Rwandan Tutsis or moderate Hutus who were killed. They often weren't given a burial. So these slabs are a representation of graves, for unmarked graves for the people who perished in the Holocaust and the Rwandan genocide.
One of the main features of this building is that there are huge, big windows. There's a lot of natural light coming in everywhere. The architect was very, very specific about wanting this to be a bright light museum. Can anybody think why? Why was that so important to him?
To shed light on the events that happened in the past.
Even in the darkest times, light will always find its way through.
The reason that the architect gave is that genocide, which is what the Holocaust was and what Rwanda was, happens in broad daylight. Everybody can see what is happening. Everybody knows what is happening. It's not a secret. So to claim afterwards that people didn't know is actually not true.
The word genocide was only invented in 1944. There was no word to describe mass murder of a people before 1944. It was invented by Polish-Jewish lawyer Raphael Lemkin. He was from Poland, escaped during the Holocaust to the United States, and was really obsessed since the pogroms in Russia and the Armenian killing, there was no word, to coin a word that describes the intentional, systematic killing of a people. And then was very instrumental in the international law passed in the United Nations in December 1948 that did the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide. And now, only in 1948, we actually have a definition. What is genocide? And genocide, very simply, is the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a group of people.
The war started when I was 8 years old. There were 4 to 5 barbed wire entrances to the ghetto, guarded by German guards with dogs and guns, so you couldn't go in and out of the ghetto. Small children were smuggled through the wall to get food. They took out bricks and smuggled food through the holes. If the Germans caught them, they were shot on the spot.
Straight after the war, the very, very famous statement of never again came out. And sadly, if you put your TV on today, you'll see that that's not what's happened. That everywhere, we have 3.5-hour plane ride away from here, there was a terrible genocide in Rwanda, which happened exactly when we here in South Africa, April 1994, were voting for our first democratic president, President Mandela, and we were euphoric about our situation, and just round the corner, this was happening. And if you switch on your TV today, we're actually watching a genocide live every night when you look at Syria. And yet the world doesn't seem to have learned anything.
And we learn the history, we learn the dates, but nothing's going to change if we just walk away from it and forget all about it. We've got to understand that firstly it can happen again, and that we the people who can either decide to let it happen and go along with it or stop it happening. So the future literally rests in our hands. And some people say, well, one person in Germany couldn't have changed the whole thing of the genocide of the Jews, but I disagree, because for me, a group of 1 million people is made up of 1 million individuals who decide to take a stand. So you've got to take a stand as an individual, and by doing that, you cause a difference and a change.
And what we really, really hope to achieve in this long process of creating the center is to be relevant, to make an institution that will be relevant to the youth of today, in the 21st century, in Johannesburg, in South Africa, to speak about issues of past atrocities, past human rights abuses, and making connections to our own society here in South Africa.
We always say you can't, in 3 or 4 hours, you can't change the world, but if you just get 2 or 3 children to think differently, to think critically, to be more aware, to be more kind or more compassionate, then we feel that we've really done our job. And generally speaking, I find every group, there's some kind of response. They just get it. They get the lessons that we want them to learn from humanity. They get the lessons of how evil the past was because of discrimination, because of prejudice, and how as an individual people, they can start thinking critically, they can think differently. I think the moral choices program that we do in terms of whether people were perpetrators, bystanders, or upstanders, or activists that we call them, and they look at their own everyday lives today to see when were they a bystander, when were they an activist, how could they move from bystander behavior to becoming more involved and more active. And those are the real lessons that we want them to take away with them from here.
The aim of meditation is not to stop all thought. So if you are having thoughts during meditation, not to worry, this is perfectly normal. Dr. Jonathan Mach explains how one can create a balance between your mind wandering and mindfulness in meditation.
There's another aspect to mindfulness that is very, very interesting. And people often ask the question that when I'm trying to practice, my mind wanders. And I used to be quite harsh in a way and say, no, it's bad for your mind to wander. It's bad. Just keep coming back to what is. And not really so, because more recent research has shown that there's a network that's beyond attention. It's called the default mode network. A fancy word to really say that when you daydream, there are networks in the brain that are activated. And what seems to be happening is that with mindfulness is you are paying attention, but you're not really that creative. On the other hand, when you're not paying attention and you're daydreaming, for example, going for a walk in nature, which I love to do, and I just let my mind wander, it's amazing how creative I can be in finding solutions or coming up with a new idea. So mindfulness has to be balanced with mind wandering. However, we must be very, very careful that we don't just become a mind wanderer or just mindfulness, which is almost impossible to keep yourself present. But the more you practice, the better you get. In brief, what actually happens in mindfulness meditation? It is shown now clearly that there's 4 areas of the brain that's involved. The first area that is activated is when you want to focus. So let's say you want to watch your breath, or the clouds, or the sensations in your left foot. You make that the anchor. Call it area A of the brain activates. What is going to happen for sure? Because even in people who practice mindfulness for 10,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 or 60,000 hours, their mind wanders. It goes off. It drifts away from, example, the breath. That area also lights up. It's a second area in the brain. Then I think this is the heart of mindfulness. When you realize that your mind has wandered and you have chosen an anchor. So you choose, for example, your breath, and before you know it, you're thinking about this morning's breakfast, or the itch in your right foot, or some sound in the background. The third area which lights up is that area that recognizes my mind has wandered. That is a very interesting impulse in the brain, because most times you can start focusing on the breath, and before you know it, it's 10 minutes later, and you've been on holiday, and you've organized your photographs, and your supper has been made up in your mind, and so it goes on and on. The fourth part of it, the fourth area of the brain, is now when you bring your focus of attention back to what you're focusing on. And what you are actually developing are muscles of the brain, of the mind, to help you that when you drift off, you can come back to what you need to focus on. That seems to have huge effects for health, especially brain health. And ultimately, it could be that the most important thing is to find stillness. Areas in your day, or maybe even in one day of the week, where you access stillness. But wherever you are, no matter how dark the night is, the difficulty of your situation, the people around you, you can, without anybody noticing, just focus on your breath. And when you focus on your breath, you can start bringing attention to what is happening right now in the present moment. That gives you enormous power over your response. So you don't react automatically, you respond, and you're creating space between yourself and the situation.
Well, that's all we have for this week's episode of Simcha, a celebration of life. As always, we'd love to hear from you, so please keep sending those Facebook messages to Spirit Sister Productions. From me, Jared Epstein, and the Simcha team, remember, meditation improves your memory.